The city lights shimmered on the rain-soaked streets of New York as the distant hum of traffic created a symphony of late-night life. Among the sea of people rushing to escape the evening drizzle, Alexander Alex Drake, a 35-year-old tech millionaire, strolled leisurely through the chaos, completely unfazed by the weather. He adjusted his navy trench coat, the collar turned up to shield him from the cool breeze. Alex wasn't an ordinary man walking home. He was a self-made tech genius who had transformed a small startup into a billion-dollar empire. He had spent the last decade building Drake Innovations, a company that developed smart devices and AI-powered solutions. His life was a cycle of meetings, product launches, and profit reports. Money wasn't just a goal. It was his way of keeping score. Tonight, he had just come from a private dinner celebrating another massive business acquisition. His investors were thrilled, his board of directors was satisfied, and his bank account had swelled even more. By all accounts, Alex was a man who had everything. But as he walked down the rain-slicked street, he felt nothing. He shoved his hands into his coat pockets and sighed, the sound of laughter and conversation from passing couples reminding him of how distant human connection had become for him. He didn't have time for love. He didn't need it. Every relationship he'd ever tried ended in either betrayal or misunderstanding, women drawn to his wealth, not the man behind it. He was done with that. Just as he turned the corner toward his penthouse apartment, something stopped him. A haunting melody floating through the air, delicate and sorrowful. He followed the sound, the violin's notes cutting through the night like a whisper of pain and beauty intertwined. And then he saw her. A young woman stood under the dim glow of a street lamp, her soaked hair clinging to her face as her fingers danced expertly over the strings of a weathered violin. She wore a thin, worn-out coat and scuffed boots, her case lying open at her feet with only a few scattered bills and coins inside. Her eyes were closed, as though she were lost in her own world, oblivious to the rain falling around her. The music tugged at something deep within Alex, an emotion he hadn't felt in years. There was vulnerability in the way she played, as if each note carried a piece of her soul. For a moment, the chaos of the city faded, leaving only the woman and her melody. When she finished, the last note hung in the air, lingering like the memory of a dream. She opened her eyes and glanced around, seemingly unaware that she had captivated anyone. A man walked past, dropping a crumpled dollar bill into her case without even stopping to listen. Alex remained rooted in place, staring at her. He didn't know why, but something about her wouldn't let him walk away. Before he could think twice, he stepped forward and dropped the large bill into her violin case, a gesture that would have been insignificant to him, but clearly wasn't to her. She blinked in surprise, her gaze lifting to meet his. "Thanks," she said, her voice soft but guarded. "You're incredible," Alex replied, surprising himself with the honesty of the statement. She shrugged, brushing a wet strand of hair from her face. "Just trying to survive." The words hit him harder than they should have. He had spent his life surrounded by luxury, where survival wasn't a concern, only expansion, growth, and profit. But in this woman's world, survival was the only goal. Before he could say anything else, she began packing up her violin, her fingers moving quickly to shield it from the rain. "Wait," Alex said, stepping closer. "I'd like to hear more." She hesitated, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Are you another rich guy looking to make me a project or something?" "No," he said quickly, though the truth of her words stung more than he expected. "I just think your music deserves a better audience." For a brief second, their eyes locked, and Alex saw something raw and unspoken, a blend of exhaustion and defiance. "I don't play for free," she finally said, zipping up her violin case. Alex smirked, pulling out his wallet again. "I wouldn't expect you to." Her expression softened, but only slightly. "You shouldn't waste your money on me. I'm not worth it." "That's not for you to decide," he replied. Without waiting for her response, he turned and walked off into the night, leaving her standing under the glow of the street lamp, the rain washing away everything but the lingering melody in his mind. As he made his way home, he couldn't shake the thought of her or the music that had briefly cracked open the walls he had built around himself. And for the first time in a long while, Alex Drake felt something he hadn't anticipated. Curiosity about something that money couldn't easily buy. The next morning, Alex sat at his sleek, glass-top desk in his penthouse apartment, overlooking the city skyline. The sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, but the warmth of the morning did little to ease his restless mind. His assistant, Evelyn, had already sent over his daily schedule, back-to-back meetings, conference calls, and a dinner with potential investors. It was everything he was used to, but today it felt hollow. He tapped his pen against the desk, his thoughts drifting back to the street performer from the night before. The way she had played wasn't just about talent, it was something deeper, as if the music had been her only way of expressing what words couldn't. And the look in her eyes when she told him she wasn't worth it, he couldn't shake it. With a sigh, Alex stood and grabbed his phone, scrolling through his contacts until he reached Evelyn's name. He hit call, and within 2 rings, her voice filled the line. "Good morning, Mr. Drake. What can I do for you?" "I need you to find someone for me," he said, pacing the length of his office. Evelyn, ever the professional, didn't miss a beat. "Who are we looking for?" "A street performer. She plays the violin, mid-20s, brown hair, blue eyes. I saw her last night near West 34th and Main." There was a pause on the other end. "Do you want her background checked?" "No," Alex said firmly. "Just find her." After hanging up, he stood by the window, watching the city below. What was he doing? This wasn't like him. He didn't chase people he didn't have to. But there was something about that woman that made him feel like if he didn't find her, he'd lose something important. By mid-afternoon, Evelyn called back with the details. "Her name is Mia Harper," she said. "She's been performing on various streets and subway platforms for a while now. No permanent address. She was evicted from her apartment about 6 months ago. Used to work as a music teacher, but the school cut her program. She's been trying to make ends meet by playing on the streets ever since." The information hit him harder than he expected. "Where is she now?" "There's a small cafe on 8th and Lexington where street performers tend to hang out between sets. You might catch her there." Alex thanked her and hung up. He didn't waste any time. Grabbing his coat, he headed straight for the cafe, his driver barely keeping up as they weaved through the city traffic. The cafe was quaint and cozy, with warm wooden floors and the smell of freshly brewed coffee in the air. A small stage sat in the corner, where a guitarist softly strummed, providing background music. Alex scanned the room and found her sitting near the window, a cup of tea in front of her, and her violin case leaning against the wall. She was sketching something on a napkin, her brow furrowed in concentration. He hesitated for a moment before approaching her table. "Mia Harper?" She looked up, her eyes widening slightly before narrowing in suspicion. "What are you doing here?" "I wanted to talk to you," he said, pulling out the chair across from her. She didn't invite him to sit, but he did anyway. "You tracked me down?" she asked, crossing her arms defensively. "I had some help," he admitted. "But don't worry. I'm not here to harass you." "Then what do you want?" Alex leaned forward, his tone softening. "I want to help you," she scoffed, leaning back in her chair. "Of course you do. That's what rich guys do when they're bored, right? Find someone to save so they can feel better about themselves?" "That's not it," he said, meeting her gaze head-on. "Your music, what I heard last night, is not just a skill. It's a gift. You shouldn't be out there struggling on the streets." "And what exactly do you think you can do for me?" she asked, her voice laced with sarcasm. "I can give you the platform you deserve," Alex replied. "Studio time, connections to the right people, a chance to perform on bigger stages." Mia fell silent, her fingers drumming against the table as she processed his words. "And what do you get out of this?" "I'm not stupid. Nobody offers help without expecting something in return." Alex hesitated, then sighed. "Honestly, I don't know why I'm doing this. But when I heard you play, it reminded me of something I lost a long time ago, something I didn't know I needed back until now. Her eyes softened, but the wall around her heart wasn't ready to crumble just yet. Look, I appreciate the offer, but I've learned the hard way not to trust things that seem too good to be true. She stood, grabbing her violin case. Alex stood as well, desperation flickering in his eyes. Just one chance, Mia. One performance. If you don't like where it leads, I'll walk away, no strings attached. Mia paused, her hand gripping the strap of her violin case. She searched his face, looking for any sign of dishonesty, but found none. Fine, she said finally. One chance. But if I get any hint that this is about stroking your ego, I'm gone. Alex smiled, relief washing over him. Deal? As she walked past him and out the door, he couldn't help but feel that this was the beginning of something far more important than either of them realized. 2 days later, Mia found herself standing outside the entrance to Drake Innovation Studio, a state-of-the-art recording facility owned by one of Alex's business partners. The sleek, modern building was intimidating, with its glass exterior and the hum of luxury cars pulling in and out of the parking lot. She adjusted the strap of her violin case and took a deep breath before walking in. Inside, the receptionist greeted her with a warm smile and directed her to the main recording room. As Mia entered, the sight of the room overwhelmed her. Glass panels, soundproof walls, and rows of high-end recording equipment that looked more expensive than her entire life. Alex was already there, dressed in his signature tailored blazer and jeans, casually scrolling through his phone. He looked up as she entered, offering her a small, genuine smile. You made it. Barely, Mia muttered, still taking in her surroundings. This place is a lot. Alex chuckled. It's just a building. What really matters is what happens inside. Mia set down her violin case on a nearby chair. I don't know about this. I'm not used to fancy equipment or producers watching my every move. There's no pressure, Alex reassured her. Think of it like playing on the street, just you and your music. No one else matters. Before she could respond, a sound engineer entered the room, setting up microphones and adjusting the lighting. He smiled politely at Mia. Whenever you're ready. Mia's hands trembled slightly as she unpacked her violin. Alex noticed but didn't comment. Instead, he walked over and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. You've got this, he said quietly. She nodded, took a deep breath, and positioned the violin under her chin. The room fell silent as she closed her eyes and let the bow glide across the strings. The first note was hesitant, but as she played, the familiar rhythm of the melody calmed her nerves. Her fingers moved gracefully, weaving a story of longing, hope, and resilience. The sound filled the room, wrapping around everyone present like a warm embrace. Alex stood by the window, mesmerized. He had heard her play before, but in this controlled environment, the purity of her sound was even more breathtaking. Her music wasn't just beautiful, it was transformative. It spoke of pain and survival, but also of hope, as though each note carried a piece of her soul. When she finished, the final note hung in the air before fading into silence. Mia exhaled and lowered her violin, her heart pounding. That, the sound engineer said, was incredible. Mia looked at Alex, her gaze cautious, but curious. It wasn't terrible, I guess. Alex laughed, the sound warm and genuine. It was perfect. Just wait until you hear it played back. The engineer played the recording, and as Mia listened, something inside her shifted. For the first time in a long while, she felt proud, not just of her performance, but of herself. Alex watched her closely, noticing the way her expression softened as she absorbed the music. You belong here, he said. Whether you believe it or not. Mia turned to face him, her defenses still partially up. I appreciate what you're trying to do, Alex. But I've been through this before. People make promises, and when things don't work out, they disappear. I'm not ready to trust that this is real. He stepped closer, his tone sincere. Then don't trust me yet. Trust your talent. Let that be the thing that keeps you moving forward. If I fail you, you'll still have that. For a moment, Mia said nothing. Then, she nodded. Okay, but I need to make one thing clear. I don't want charity, and I'm not here to be anyone's feel-good project. Alex smiled, knowing she needed to say that to protect herself. Understood. I don't do charity. This is an investment, one I believe in. The agreement was simple. Alex would finance her first professional recordings, connect her with industry contacts, and set up opportunities for her to perform in larger venues. In return, Mia would commit to giving her music the effort it deserved. Despite her reservations, she couldn't help but feel a flicker of excitement as she packed up her violin. For the first time in months, she felt like she had a path forward, even if it wasn't completely clear where it would lead. Before she left, Alex walked her to the door. One more thing, he said. There's a gala next week. It's a charity event for the arts, and I'd like you to perform. Mia blinked in surprise. A gala? Alex, I'm not exactly the black tie type. You don't have to be, he replied. Just be yourself. That's what people will remember. She hesitated, biting her lip. I'll think about it. As she walked out into the afternoon sun, her violin case swinging by her side, she realized that for the first time in a long while, she wasn't afraid of what was next. Back inside the studio, Alex leaned against the doorframe, watching her leave. There was something about Mia Harper that stirred something inside him, something he hadn't felt in years. He had thought helping her would be a simple act of generosity, but now he wasn't so sure, because with every note she played, she was slowly breaking down the walls he had spent his whole life building. The days following the gala felt like a whirlwind for Mia. Her phone buzzed constantly with calls from event organizers, producers, and even a few major labels who had heard about her performance. She tried to take it all in stride, but deep down, she was overwhelmed. For months, she had struggled to earn enough for a meal, and now, people were throwing opportunities at her like she was an overnight sensation. But she knew the truth. It wasn't overnight. It was years of pain, sacrifice, and perseverance finally paying off. And yet, with each call she answered and each meeting she scheduled, there was one person who stayed at the center of it all, Alex. He had been by her side through everything, offering advice without being pushy, encouraging her without making her feel like she owed him. One afternoon, after a meeting with a producer, Mia sat at a small cafe, nursing a cup of tea and staring at the contracts she had been given. She felt paralyzed. What if she made the wrong choice? What if this was all temporary, and she'd end up back on the street, violin case in hand? Her phone buzzed, and she saw Alex's name. Without hesitation, she answered. Busy, he asked, his voice calm and reassuring. Just drowning in contracts, she said, trying to sound lighthearted, but failing to mask her anxiety. Let me guess, you're overthinking everything, he replied with a chuckle. Mia sighed. Maybe. Come to the rooftop garden at my place. I have something to show you. An hour later, Mia arrived at Alex's luxurious penthouse. The doorman greeted her warmly, and she took the private elevator to the top floor. When the doors opened, she stepped into a space unlike anything she had seen before, a rooftop garden with flowers blooming in every direction, their fragrance mixing with the cool breeze. The city skyline stretched out before her, shimmering under the golden glow of the late afternoon sun. Alex was waiting near a small table, where 2 cups of coffee steamed in the crisp air. He waved her over. This is beautiful, Mia said, taking it all in. I figured you could use a break, Alex said, handing her a cup. Too much pressure kills creativity, and we don't want that, do we? She chuckled softly and sat across from him. Thanks for the escape. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, sipping their drinks and watching the city below. But Mia's mind was still racing. Finally, she couldn't hold it in any longer. What if I make the wrong decision? She blurted out, setting her cup down. What if I sign with the wrong label or lose everything? What if this all disappears and I'm back where I started? Alex leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "You won't. You can't know that," she said, her voice rising slightly. "You've never had to worry about losing everything." His gaze darkened, and for a moment, she regretted her words. But instead of pulling back, he surprised her by opening up. "I didn't always have this," Alex said, gesturing to the luxurious rooftop around them. "I grew up in a small apartment with barely enough to eat. My mom worked 3 jobs, and my dad left when I was a kid. Everything I built came from fear of going back to that life." Mia's breath hitched, her eyes softening. "I didn't know." He shrugged, leaning back in his chair. "I don't talk about it much. But I understand what you're feeling. The fear doesn't go away. But you have to make peace with it and trust yourself. Look how far you've come, Mia. You did this." For the first time, she saw Alex not as the untouchable millionaire who had rescued her, but as someone who had fought his own battles. She wiped a tear from her cheek, her voice barely above a whisper. "You make it sound so simple." "It's not simple," Alex said, reaching across the table to take her hand. "But you're not alone anymore. You have me. And whether you succeed or fail, I'm not going anywhere." His words pierced through the fear she had been carrying, and for once, she allowed herself to believe him. "Okay," she said softly, her fingers curling around his. They sat there for a while, their hands intertwined as the city continued its bustling rhythm below. For the first time in what felt like forever, Mia's world wasn't spinning out of control. "Let me show you something," Alex said, standing and guiding her to the edge of the garden where the view of the skyline was breathtaking. "When I was building my company, I used to come up here and stare at the city. Every time I felt like giving up, I reminded myself that everything down there was built by people who took risks." Mia smiled, the tension easing from her shoulders. "You're a good motivational speaker, you know." He laughed, the sound warm and comforting. "Only for you." As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Mia realized how much Alex had become a part of her life. Not just as a mentor or supporter, but as someone who understood her fears and believed in her dreams. And, for the first time, she wondered if this was more than just a business relationship. Her heart thumped at the thought, but she quickly pushed it aside. Right now, she had decisions to make, and with Alex by her side, she felt ready to face them. The night of Mia's first major performance arrived, a charity concert held at an iconic concert hall in the city. The seats were filled with industry professionals, influential donors, and music critics, all eager to witness the rising star they had heard so much about. The thought of performing in front of so many powerful people left Mia with shaky hands as she adjusted her bow backstage. Alex found her in the dressing room, leaning against the vanity mirror and taking slow, measured breaths. When she noticed him, she forced a smile, but he saw through it instantly. "Nervous?" he asked, stepping closer. "Understatement of the year," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "What if I mess up?" "You won't," Alex said confidently. "But even if you do, you're allowed to. You don't have to be perfect, Mia. Just be you." Her eyes flicked to him, searching for reassurance. "What if they don't like me? Then they're the ones missing out," he said with a soft smile. "You don't need their approval to know how talented you are." Mia's breathing slowed as his words sank in. There was something about Alex's presence that grounded her, as if he could absorb her fears just by standing next to her. Without thinking, she reached out and squeezed his hand. "Thank you," she whispered. "I'm always here," he replied, and she believed him. When the stage manager signaled that it was time, Alex gave her hand one final squeeze. "I'll be right out there watching." Mia nodded, picked up her violin, and walked toward the stage. The spotlight beamed down on her as she stepped onto the stage, momentarily blinding her to the faces in the audience. She took her position in the center, her heart pounding like a drum. The silence was deafening, but she remembered Alex's words. "You don't have to be perfect. Just be you." With a deep breath, she lifted the violin to her chin and began to play. The first note was delicate, like the touch of a breeze, but it carried strength beneath its softness. As the melody unfolded, Mia closed her eyes, letting the music take over. She didn't play for the audience. She played for herself, for the girl who had once thought she wasn't good enough, for the version of her that had stood on the streets playing for scraps, and for the woman she was becoming now. The notes swirled through the hall, telling a story of resilience, heartbreak, and rebirth. The crowd sat mesmerized, unable to tear their eyes away from her. Each crescendo and gentle descent struck them like a wave, drawing them deeper into her world. In the middle of her performance, she glanced toward the crowd and found Alex sitting in the front row, his eyes locked on her. His expression wasn't one of someone watching for perfection. It was admiration, pure and genuine. For a moment, it was just the two of them, connected by a silent understanding that needed no words. When the final note faded, the room was so silent she could hear her own heartbeat. Then, like a tidal wave, applause erupted, the sound crashing over her and filling every inch of the concert hall. Mia lowered her violin, tears welling in her eyes as she took a bow. The applause didn't stop, growing louder as the audience rose to their feet. Backstage, her legs felt like jelly, but the adrenaline kept her upright. She barely had time to catch her breath before Alex appeared, pulling her into a tight embrace. "You were incredible," he whispered into her hair. Mia held on to him, tears streaming down her face. "I did it." "You did more than that," he said, pulling back to look her in the eyes. "You proved to everyone in that room, including yourself, what you're capable of." She laughed through her tears, wiping them away. "I couldn't have done it without you." Alex's gaze softened, and for a moment, the world around them faded. He cupped her face gently, his thumb brushing away a stray tear. "Yes, you could have. But I'm glad I was here to see it." The intensity of his gaze sent a shiver down her spine. There was something unspoken between them, something that had been building since the night he first heard her play on the street. For a moment, she thought he might kiss her, and she didn't know if she'd stop him. But before either of them could move, a reporter called out from behind them. "Mia Harper, do you have a moment for a quick interview?" Mia blinked, the spell breaking as reality crashed back in. She nodded to the reporter and gave Alex a quick, grateful look before heading toward the interview. Alex stood there, watching her go. His heart felt lighter than it had in years, but there was a growing ache too. He had come into her life to help her succeed, but now something more was at stake. He was falling in love with her. And for a man who had built his life around control, the realization terrified him. The days following the performance were a whirlwind. Mia's phone didn't stop ringing. Record labels, talk show invitations, and event organizers flooded her inbox, each offering her a bigger opportunity than the last. She met with producers, gave interviews, and signed deals that seemed like dreams just weeks ago. But amidst all the excitement, she felt a strange emptiness, as if something important was slipping through her fingers. Each night, after the calls stopped and the lights dimmed, she sat by her window, violin resting on her lap, thinking about the one person who hadn't contacted her since that night, Alex. Their last conversation lingered in her mind, the way his hands cradled her face, the way his eyes spoke volumes without saying a word. She knew she wasn't imagining the connection between them, but now it felt like he was pulling away. After days of hesitation, she decided to do something she had rarely done in her life, chase after someone. Mia stood outside Alex's penthouse, heart pounding as she waited for him to answer the door. When it finally opened, Alex stood there, his hair slightly tousled, wearing a casual t-shirt and jeans. He looked surprised to see her, but there was warmth in his gaze. "Mia," he said, stepping aside to let her in. "I wasn't expecting you." She walked inside, setting her violin case on the floor. "I know. I wasn't expecting to come here either." She turned to face him, the weight of her emotions finally spilling out. "Why have you been avoiding me?" Alex ran a hand through his hair, exhaling deeply. "I wasn't avoiding you, Mia. I just didn't want to get in the way of your success." Mia frowned. You think you're in the way? Alex, you're the reason I'm here. You've been with me through everything, and now, when I need you the most, you're disappearing. He took a step toward her, his voice low. I don't want to hold you back. You're on the verge of something huge, and I know how easy it is for people like me to complicate things. Her heart ached at his words. You think you're a complication? I've seen it before, he said, his eyes clouded with doubt. People get caught up in relationships and lose focus. I don't want to be the reason you lose what you've worked so hard for. Mia closed the distance between them, her hands trembling as she grabbed his. You're not a distraction, Alex. You're the reason I had the strength to fight for this in the first place. I don't care how messy it gets. I want you in my life. Alex's breath hitched, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, as if the dam holding back his emotions finally broke, he cupped her face and kissed her. The kiss wasn't rushed or uncertain. It was everything they had been holding back. Mia melted into him, her arms wrapping around his neck as he pulled her closer. In that moment, the noise of the outside world disappeared. When they finally pulled apart, Alex rested his forehead against hers, his voice barely a whisper. I'm scared too, you know. I've spent my life controlling everything. And with you, I can't. But I don't want to lose this. Mia smiled through her tears. Then don't. We'll figure it out together. The following weeks were a delicate balance between Mia's rising career and her deepening relationship with Alex. They worked through the chaos together, meeting deadlines, attending events, and making time for each other in between. One night, after a sold-out performance at a prestigious venue, they sat on the floor of Alex's penthouse, sharing takeout Chinese food straight from the containers. This feels more real than anything else, Mia said, leaning her head on Alex's shoulder. Because it is, he replied, kissing the top of her head. No contracts, no business deals. Just us. Mia smiled, feeling a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. I don't know what's ahead, but as long as you're with me, I'm not afraid. Alex tightened his arm around her. And I'll be here, no matter how chaotic life gets. The two sat in comfortable silence, watching the city lights twinkle outside. For the first time, Mia felt like she wasn't just surviving, she was living. And with Alex by her side, she knew they could face anything together. Months passed, and life became a mix of challenges, joy, and unexpected surprises. Mia's career soared as she released her first album, performed on major stages, and became a recognized name in the music world. But no matter how busy things got, she always made time to come home to Alex. One evening, after a particularly long day of interviews and meetings, Mia walked into Alex's penthouse, kicking off her heels and sighing with relief. She found him on the balcony, leaning against the railing with a glass of wine in hand, staring out at the city. Long day, he asked, turning around as she approached. The longest, she replied, wrapping her arms around him. But seeing you makes it better. Alex kissed her forehead, guiding her to the small table where a bottle of wine and 2 glasses waited. They sat together, watching the city lights twinkle like stars. Mia took a sip of her wine, then set the glass down, her gaze drifting toward the view. It's crazy to think how much my life has changed. A year ago, I was playing on the street, and now I'm here with you doing things I never dreamed of. Alex reached for her hand, interlacing their fingers. You earned every bit of it. Don't ever forget that. She smiled, but there was a hint of hesitation in her eyes. But I don't want to lose what's really important. He raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? Mia turned to face him fully, her voice steady but vulnerable. I don't want my career to come between us. I know how busy things are going to get, and I'm scared that eventually we'll drift apart. Alex gently cupped her face, his thumb brushing her cheek. We won't drift apart. I've been in high-pressure worlds my whole life, and I know how easy it is to lose sight of what matters. But with you, Mia, it's different. We've built something real, and I'm not letting go of that, ever. Tears welled in her eyes as she leaned into his touch. Promise me? "I promise," he whispered, sealing the vow with a kiss. Months later, on the night of Mia's most anticipated performance at a prestigious music awards ceremony, Alex stood backstage, watching her prepare. She wore a breathtaking red gown that shimmered under the lights, her violin resting securely in her hands. She glanced at him, and the look they shared was one of silent understanding and support. "You're going to be amazing," he said, giving her a reassuring smile. She smiled back, her nerves slowly melting away. "Thank you for everything." As she stepped onto the stage, the sound of applause filled the air. Alex watched from the wings, his heart swelling with pride. The woman standing on that stage wasn't just the talented street performer he had met under a rainy street lamp. She was someone who had fought for her dreams and embraced love along the way. When her performance ended, the audience erupted into a standing ovation, and Mia bowed gracefully. But her eyes sought Alex in the crowd, finding him smiling and clapping louder than anyone else. Later that night, they returned to Alex's penthouse, the trophy she had won sitting on the coffee table as a reminder of her triumph. They sat together on the couch, sharing another quiet moment. Mia traced her fingers over the trophy, then looked at Alex. "I thought this would be the highlight of my night," she said. "But it's not." He raised an eyebrow, amused. "What is?" "Being here with you," she replied, her voice soft but sure. "Because the awards, the fame, it's all amazing. But without you, it wouldn't feel complete." Alex pulled her into his arms, kissing her forehead. "Then it's a good thing you're stuck with me." She laughed, resting her head against his chest. "I wouldn't have it any other way." As the city lights glimmered outside the window, Alex and Mia sat together, knowing that their journey wasn't over. It was just beginning. Because love wasn't something they had planned for, but it had become the greatest reward of all.